Start them with something that's going to shock them culturally, because then it develops an appreciation for that particular culture. But I think it also builds in that linguistic adaptability that we all need to have as musicians.
That's today's guest, saxophonist, professor, and activist Jose Antonio Zayas Cabán on the value of jumping right into music from another culture. Welcome to Music Ed Insights. I'm leadership trainer and former band director Alan Fire, here with composer and co-college music education program head Steve Shanley.
Each episode, Alan and I talk with national thought leaders in music education with practical insights for K-12 music educators.
Steve, tell us about our guest.
Jose Antonio Zayas Cabán is a multi-Grammy-nominated saxophonist, McKnight Fellow, and activist whose work bridges music and social justice. Born and raised in Puerto Rico, he now resides in Minneapolis, where he leads Our Streets as executive director. Find Jose's full bio, show notes, and resources at musicedinsights.com. Alan, what was the takeaway you had from this episode?
Well, simple, but the affirmation of the idea of starting with Latin music because of the rhythmic foundation. It's more natural and universal. So do it. Start with Latin music. How about you?
We start this interview a little differently than many of our past guests because he's an American citizen, born in Puerto Rico, and living in the Twin Cities right now. I thought it would be interesting to get his take on how recent events have affected his life and the lives of students.
Yeah, it's compelling. I also love that Jose said that we don't have to jump right to the most authentic versions of tunes. Just get started. Our insiders get ad-free episodes. You can learn more about that at our website. But for now, let's get to Jose Antonio Zayas Cabán.
Jose Antonio Zayas Cabán, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Excited to be here, and thanks for having me.
You bet. So you have definitely been in the thick of it these past few months. What do you want our listeners to know about what's happening in the Twin Cities right now?
Well, just recently the news came out that the ICE occupation is going through a drawdown, but for the last 3 months, DHS, Department of Homeland Security, has sent Border Patrol and ICE agents across the city to effectively terrorize our neighbors, some of which are immigrants, some of which are not. That ended up in 2 executions recently of Alex Preddy and Renee Good. And apart from the violence, stress, and tension, there's been a lot of misinformation about what's happening. You know, these people were legal observers, like a lot of other people in the community, just going out and watching out for their neighbors. I'd also say there's been an incredible amount of courage in the community and a lot of organizing. People have trained themselves. They sought training. They've provided mutual aid. They've helped with rent, car payments, low payments. Folks are really coming out to step up on behalf of their communities, and a lot of them are taking risks in going out to patrol, bringing their whistles, and making sure that if the agents are coming around to kidnap someone, whether on the street or from their home, that it's being recorded and that other people are being alerted. And I think the last piece that I would say is sometimes what is overlooked about these kinds of occupations or what happens in wartime, which is the economic fallout. You know, a lot of businesses are now really hurting. I think the city of Minneapolis estimated the economic impact is somewhere north of $200 million. There's a lot of people who haven't been able to make rent, and the rental assistance need, I think, is another $50 million, maybe more. And that's the stuff that we're going to have to be dealing with now and moving forward. And, you know, my hope is that our elected officials honestly step up and keep up with the community efforts, because I do feel like the community is doing the bulk of the work, while our elected officials, unfortunately, have kind of gone on this little tour and they've done a lot of interviews. But, you know, where's the eviction moratorium? Where's the rent freeze? Where are the forgivable business loans? So that kind of encapsulates at least my perspective on it. And of course, as an individual person of color, my experience has been seeing a lot of patrol, taking a lot of extra precautions, you know, things that I don't feel like I should really have to be doing as a citizen of the United States, just to be able to go out and go to work or go out and get groceries or just be a social creature with my friends and colleagues.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit because I and Alan, we're good, faithful readers of the news. And I would say we felt like we had a pretty good understanding of what was going on. We were reading about what was happening there and felt somewhat plugged in. But where it really hit for me was when I was speaking with you a few weeks ago, and you mentioned that it was maybe going to be a while before you felt comfortable going out to mail something from the post office. And I think for a lot of folks, it takes something like what happened to me to realize, okay, I've been reading about this. I know it's not a movie, but also it's not really affecting me or anyone I know. And for that, it became very real for me all of a sudden. Are you comfortable sharing just a few more of your personal experiences when you talk about precautions you've taken or what you have seen?
Yeah, so I think that the first thing to say is spending a lot less time outside, doing things like making copies of my documents in case I am targeted or profiled. Like I understand I'm a US citizen, Puerto Ricans are natural citizens at birth. We are a property of the United States, so to speak. But understanding that these detentions, these arrests, these abductions are just happening because of profiling, whether you have an accent or you're of different skin color. So, really winding down a lot of the activities and depending on other people to support me, uh, just with basic things like getting the groceries or running some errands and spending a lot more time at home. While at the same time, kind of activating and helping support some of the mutual aid efforts and some of the people who are organizing. I do work in organizing and I work in advocacy. But I think the main thing was just taking less chances on being out there. And I think that's part of it. The other is there was someone, I think it was probably covered by the national news, a person from Venezuela who was shot in my neighborhood by the agency. And that was on the eve of one of the concerts that I was performing. So the whole night it was helicopters and police, because it was just a couple blocks down. And then the next day leaving, seeing the street a mess because they used tear gas and I think there was a parent with children in the car where they threw a canister into the vehicle and they had to hospitalize all the little kiddos and babies. And it was just kind of there's a sadness and a frustration that sets in. But I think the other side of it, as I was talking to you about having to take those precautions, not taking risks and making those choices, there's sort of a normal to it too, because, you know, Dr. West would say the chocolate side of the street has been experiencing this for 250 years throughout this American experiment, right? With the police here in the US and abroad, of course, I'm very aware of the fact that the US, through its interventions and warfare, has these kinds of things happen in other countries as a result of US intervention. And at the border, I'm a big follower of what happens at the border. Minimum 10,000 people have died at the border at the hands of this agency, maximum 80,000. I just recently listened to an interview by a former Border Patrol agent who described the border as a graveyard. And she went on to talk about how this is actually normal for them. It has nothing to do with training or lack of training. These are the tactics that they're taught to utilize. They're generally very self-governed and they're kind of taught to, in a way, conceal some of their actions and their tactics, much like they did with the crime scene after Rene Good was executed and similar to what they tried to do when Alex Preddy was gunned down. And so there's a little bit of same candy, different wrapper, because I always have to wear an armor when I go out as a person of color to some degree. This has just been kind of intensified now that we've seen something that normally happens at the border or happens in the exterior of the US start to take place in the interior, and even more so, of course, like more directly impacting white presenting people, which is sometimes a little bit more shocking and more novel to folks who are used to seeing these kinds of injustices, like said, happen on the chocolate side of the street.
So you and I have talked about how Latin jazz, or music that mixes influence from American jazz with music from Puerto Rico, Cuba, the Caribbean, Central America, South American traditions, how that just seems to be almost universally loved. Like we don't need to be taught how to appreciate it. And I think you can look no further right now than the worldwide popularity of Bad Bunny, right? So what is it that you think is special about this music, and what just draws people in instantly?
I'll say it the way I would describe it, speaking to a musically trained audience, but I think the key word is it is universally accessible. And I was thinking about that, and I have thought about that for many years, especially when I personally decided to focus on highlighting Puerto Rican music and Caribbean music and Latin American music. That when you think about the peak of tonal music, depending on what historian you talk to, that there's a different top of the mountain, right? Before tonal music starts to break into the different kinds of atonal music that we started to get acclimated to in the 20th century. It was an effort to think about how to take the overtone series, or the scale, to its limit and move from these sort of different planetary or solar system centers from one to another in a way that was unique and creative. But it was all kind of rooted in what we naturally know is occurring, which is that series of sounds, those overtones. And how do we take advantage of that to structure it in a way where people can listen to something that, even if they don't understand it, because it's something that's in nature and something that we experienced when we got into the world, it feels like a natural fit, right? And I think there's something about African music as it came to the Americas that touches on that, but on the rhythmic spectrum, in that, in a way, it builds music around these natural proportions, like the clave, for example, the 2-3 clave or the 3-2 clave, and it builds music off of that that is both accessible, but it kind of touches on the rhythmic foundations that we're kind of born with naturally, whether we are from that continent or we're derivative from different continents. And so that's always been kind of my theory, is that rhythmically, if there was a rhythmic overtone series from nature, the people from West Africa that were brought over as slaves to the mainland US and to the Caribbean had already figured that out. And these patterns that we love and enjoy are just like intrinsically built into our psyche. And we just kind of feel touched by them. And then, because a lot of the music then, whether it's the horns or the keyboards or the rhythmic section in general, is built off of that, no matter how complex it is, at the heart of it, it has something that is uniquely accessible. When you play that music for anyone, they just feel like moving.
It's been 16 years now since I've helmed a program that had jazz bands in it, but the memories are flooding back of how at some point in my career, I switched from starting the jazz band year with swing, because that's like what jazz is, to starting with Latin jazz, because it got students moving and feeling music immediately. We would do a little bit of dancing and it just took hold right away. And then we saved the complex swing language for later.
And certainly, I love the idea of the rhythmic overtone series, just sort
Yeah.
of this innate. And you are so correct about clave. And I'm just thinking about how you can find that in the Beatles music. You'll find it in any kind of music that really had mass popularity. That clave is there, whether those people were listening to Latin jazz music or not. There's
Yep.
something about that pattern that we just seem to love.
That's how nature is, right? It's proportional, it's not square. During the pandemic, I had the opportunity to teach some young students virtually who just wanted to learn like general music skills, or they wanted to start instruments. And I found myself just being like, okay, asking the parents to get like a little xylophone keyboard because and instead of using the piano, just to have like an octave and a half or something to work with them on. But when I was giving them musical examples to introduce them to things like form or meter, instead of always using these traditional Western orchestral or choral works, why not introduce them to the things that we want them to learn via other cultures? One of them being, of course, Latin American music. Like, why can't we teach music theory or music appreciation by saying instead of your first introduction to this concept always being like the white Western tradition, let's go to Brazil and talk about these things that we need you to learn to be a good musician and use their music. Let's go to West Asia or the Middle East and pull out some musics to talk to you about this particular kind of scale or this particular kind of rhythm. And I think that is rooted in this culture of abundance that we like to colonize, but not incorporate. These African traditions that we brought over, it's more than that. And I think that's part of it is that the objective of these musical traditions at their outset wasn't to demonstrate skill or talent, it was to bring community together. And even if you're doing it subconsciously as a culture, if you're trying to play a game of averages, like what do we come up with in order for people to feel welcome, then you're going to develop music and food and art that is inclusive. And I think that's at the heart of it.
Well, you started to touch on this a little bit. My next question for you was going to be about how music teachers can use this universal love for Latin jazz, for these rhythms, how they can tap into that and use it in their own classroom teaching. Could you expand on that a little bit, please?
I think what I would say is think about different cultures as a resource to both expand their experience of what the world is and also how music can be made, while simultaneously teaching the concepts that they need to know to be successful. And I think that's part of going through a self-education or a re-education to then be a resource for the students themselves. Don't just save it for the world music class, where that's where they learn everything they need to know about what happens in the rest of the world. Like if you want to teach really basic concepts, of like whether it's harmony and rhythm or grouping or division, any particular meters that you want to introduce, like Alan was saying, just start them with something that's going to shock them culturally, because then it develops an appreciation for that particular culture. But I think it also builds in that linguistic adaptability that we all need to have as musicians. So my direct response to an educator is like, get comfortable with being uncomfortable so you can teach them outside the box, which ultimately will help them be more successful. And to me, it's sort of like spreading out across cultures. You don't need to know anything deep, right? It's just like tap into it, and see what you can find that's okay for you to teach through that and say, hey, I found this and it directly speaks to something that we've been trying to learn. Or, hey, I want to introduce you to this new concept, but let's listen to music from another part of the world.
Alan earlier referenced his high school jazz band that he taught and that he'd begin the year with some Latin jazz music. And we are lucky here in Iowa that for various reasons, there are a lot of jazz bands. Most schools have a jazz band. Most schools will have a concert band. And also, a lot of the teachers are interested in programming music that to their ears sounds Latin American. And the result is sometimes they program something that you or I might hear and think, very authentic, this was well arranged, or this was well composed within the parameters of this particular genre. Or you or I might hear, and it just kind of sounds like someone who heard the I Love Lucy theme a couple decades ago and thought, I'm going to write something that just kind of sounds like that and not as authentic. I'm curious, would you rather, ideally, people are programming like the correct stuff in terms of it's written with an informed sort of perspective. Would you rather, though, they not even experiment trying to get the kids acclimated to those sounds as opposed to programming something that you might hear and think, oh, this person really did not know what they were doing? If that question makes any sense to you.
Yeah, it does make sense.
Like, how snobby should we be? I guess that's another way of
Yeah,
asking it.
Thank you for being concise.
right. And I think my honest, direct answer is not at all. I think awareness is important in education. So I think it's more about like creating a little bit of depth of consciousness. I do think it's important to sometimes go back to those OGs, and just really break it down. And let's play something that either might not be complicated or might be outside of your wheelhouse. Because what I would say is my best language learning experiences, being abroad, I don't really speak a third language, but just to survive, have been through immersion. And whether you make that commitment to go through that immersion, I think that's when you really start to learn to think differently. And I know both of you are educators and you perhaps understand what I'm talking about. It's like it takes a little bit to rewire that brain until you start doing stuff that's really OG, and you're like, oh, okay, like I've always heard montunos, but now I really understand what it is and why and how it lines up with the stuff that's happening in the horn section or how it has to do with the clave or whatever it might be. And so my answer to that is like immersion does help and make a difference, even if it's a little bit of it or not. And so, yes, be snobby, but do it in a way where it results in some helpful rewiring or deepening that understanding. But at the same time, I do appreciate when those cultural nuances are represented, even if the music is more like some reworking of I Love Lucy or I don't know, but the thing is like I listen to recordings of Latin American people doing that to music they're hearing when they were coming to the US. And that's why ultimately it was sort of labeled as salsa because it just sort of started to absorb. And that is kind of the spirit of the culture, which is it fuses and it evolves. I was working with Miguel Senon recently, and his primary language for communication is jazz. But what I love about him is that he's still an ambassador for musical traditions. But I don't need him to be playing traditional plena on the alto sax. I think it's really awesome that he's evolving our music in a way that can be sustainable moving forward. And so I think there's a lesson in being able to say, how do we melt our cultures into something that is meaningful for us both? So the short answer is both and I think are important. Depth of understanding and respect for that cultural background and that history is an important lesson. We need to learn that our culture is not the center of the world. It's part of a larger community. And at the same time, it's a lesson of coming together and bridging gaps to find ways to take two different musics and turn them into something more.
So we can start with Jalapeno Dreams by Doug Beach.
Absolutely.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, you've done a wonderful job of circling around to the last question I have for you, which is back to this unrest in the Twin Cities and other parts of our country right now. Do you have any other thoughts on how music can play a role in connecting and healing us?
Yeah, I would say I'll take your words. It is a form of healing. It's a form of building connection and building bridges. And I would also say to any educator who's thinking about what can I do as an artist, it's also a form of resistance and it's a form of joy that can be resistance. And I talk about this with my organizing community all of the time. One, taking care of yourself is a form of resistance. The only way to be a good advocate is if you're healthy and rested. So building a community where you can take rest and they can do the work and you can have that exchange is an important part of organizing or going on strike or forming a protest. And as musicians and people in the arts, we can do the same thing, which is taking care of other people. And at the same time, sometimes putting them in a position where they're being challenged to listen to something that forces them to think outside the box. And the beauty of what we do is that it's very accessible. And I think this is what we were talking about on the phone. Like, I always feel like I can have harder conversations with people over a good meal. So if I'm having someone over and I know we're going to get into it, if I make sure the food's good, they'll talk more and they'll be willing to stay with me a little bit longer. And I think sometimes we can take our contributions for granted as an aside, but I think it's a big part of the fabric of how we learn to communicate with one another. You look at this example, and maybe you guys have done this. I don't blame anyone for it, but somebody will come out on social media and say, well, if you feel this way, then unfriend me. I'm like, that makes sense, right? You're having a disagreement. You don't want to be in that uncomfortable place of disagreement. But I think part of our job as artists is to create causes and reasons for conversation, especially when we disagree. Because if we continue not to talk to one another, those segments get cemented even more. And so there's a bringing together that I think musicians and artists can do. And connecting it to, for example, the Bad Bunny concert at the end, this message may have meant different things to different people, but one of the things that I think he did very effectively is reframing the word America,
Yes.
which here
Yeah.
in this country, people
Yeah.
used to refer to a nation when in fact it refers to a continent, right? It's not a nationality, it's a continentalism. And he said, Canada all the way to Brazil, we're all Americans. And so that's something that the arts can help do if you think about it as a tool for social impact. Even just reframing your thinking about it, like, why am I doing this and what am I doing this for? You don't have to change much. It helps you reframe how you're going to show up. And that reframing, I think, has a direct impact on the experience that people leave with.
Great stuff, Jose. Thank you so much for joining us today. Can you stick around for a few lighter questions?
Yes.
All right, here's the lightning round. What is your favorite restaurant in the Twin Cities these days?
Okay, I'm going to say Quang, which is Vietnamese. They have incredible pho. But if you're up here or you're willing to come up here to support, go to any immigrant-owned business and support them.
All right, how about a musical artist, a group, or even just a song that you want more people to know about?
I think since I've been working with Angelica Negron, go listen to her and her music. She's been an incredible composer and collaborator. So Angelica Negron, give her a shout.
How about a favorite vacation destination?
Always, always Puerto Rico. Going home is like recharging my cultural batteries. And wait, you guys are based in Iowa. It's only 2 stops. You just come to Minneapolis and it's 5 hours down. I highly recommend. And don't just stay in the San Juan area. Get a car and go around the island. Some beautiful beaches, some beautiful sights, great weather. In Puerto Rico, we only have 2 seasons, hot and not so hot. So it's easy.
All right, how about the most memorable musical performance or concert you've attended?
I think the most impactful for me, which directly connects to what we're talking about right now, was listening to Claude Delangle, who was then I think, leading the Paris Conservatory as a saxophone professor. I think he's recently retired. I don't know if he's retired or not, but he comes to the US a lot, but he came to Minnesota and gave a concert that was entirely Latin American composers. And then I realized, wow, I can just focus on something that motivates me to do music as a classical saxophonist rather than force myself to learn music that doesn't really inspire me. And that really stuck with me.
And finally, a book recommendation, please, for our listeners.
It's called Empire of Borders. So if you really want to know about what's happening right now in the Twin Cities and some of the other operations, Todd Miller wrote a 3-book series. He is an incredible reporter, and it's the most in-depth look at the immigration apparatus that U.S. has all over the world. And I'll just share a little tidbit of how he describes it to see if it gets people interested in looking at the book. He says the U.S. border does not start in the Mexico and U.S. border. It starts in Guatemala, it starts in Puerto Rico, it starts in Tel Aviv. So learn about where the U.S. border actually is and follow his through line of the invisible border of the U.S. around the world. You will know a lot about what has happened and feel a lot more prepared to understand what's coming.
Jose Antonio Zayas Cabán, thank you so much for joining us today, for connecting the dots, for talking music, for talking life in the Twin Cities. It's been insightful and cool and vulnerable, and we really appreciate you making time for us.
Yeah, thank you, and much love to the folks in Iowa. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Music Ed Insights.
We're supported by Group Dynamic, a leading provider of youth leadership workshops. Alan works with dozens of schools each year to help develop their leaders. Learn more at groupdynamicyouth.com.
Or you could email me at alan@groupdynamic.net. Also sponsored by the Co-College Music Education Program. They've got a website too.
Just click their link at our website or email me at sshanley@coe.edu.
Also, The Normal Design, helping normal companies and people create memorable, meaningful, and professional designs and branding. More at thenormaldesign.com.
And Winterset Websites, website design and maintenance. wintersetwebsites.com.
Our Facebook page is Music Ed Insights.
Our website has program notes, links, and a one-page download of this episode's key takeaways. That's on musicedinsights.com.
You can expect a new episode most Mondays during the school year.
Get current.
Stay relevant.
Music Ed Insights.